It's the Happy Families Podcast. It's the podcast for the time-poor parent who just wants answers now.
We are so excited. Before we dive into today's science for the doctor's desk, somebody told me the other day that they don't like the title The Doctor's Desk because it makes me sound pompous. It makes me sound like I'm saying, oh, look at what's coming from the doctor's desk, like I'm the professor and I'm going to profess things.
Really?
Yeah, and I'm trying to work out whether they've got a point or whether it's actually just fun because I'm a doctor and I'm sharing the cool stuff that... Anyway, I don't want to think too much about it. That's what scientists do, and that's why I left academia. Big news, Kylie. Our daughter has been away for 18 months doing volunteer work in the UK, and she comes home tonight.
There's no more sleeps.
No more sleeps. We will have more information about that as we celebrate the joy and the delight of having our daughter come home, probably over the next few episodes of the Happy Families podcast. But today it is a Doctor's Desk podcast. I'm so sorry to the person who thought it sounded like it was too much, but we're going to keep calling it that anyway. I don't care. I mean, I do. I actually do. I do care, but I don't care enough to change it.
No, but it separates everything else we talk about because this is where the research is.
Because we never talk about research and science in any other episode. You always get me in trouble for hijacking all the episodes with research. Let's go. Oh, my goodness. We're going to have so much fun with this one. A brand new study from Lucy Emery and Ben Levi, some scientists who are based at Penn State University in the US. They've done this really interesting piece of research about humour in parenting, Kylie. Does it have a role? Now, if you were to rate how much humour you experienced as a child growing up in your household, like how funny were your parents? I feel like you were just like you were a clown balloon just going, it's all gone. There's nothing there. All the air's out of the balloon. No humour here.
I don't think I'd put funny on my list of descriptive words of my parents growing up.
Yeah. Based on my last 25 years, I don't know if they listen to the pod. I don't think they know the technology and know how to do it. I would agree with you. Whereas I grew up in a house where my dad's favourite thing to do when number one, he loved to sneeze and scare people. He did these huge sneezes and he just cracked up every time he scared the life out of people. But he also did this witch's cackle laugh.
Is that where you get it from?
Yeah, I got it off my dad. And this is what he does. Are you ready for this? I've never done this on the pod today. This is a one and done experience. Here we go. That's what he did. And we would just crack up. We used to wrestle. We used to play games. I grew up with a very, very fun dad. My mum is very serious. My mum says that I don't have a funny bone in my body, but I think it's because she doesn't, because I am so damn funny. Anyway, Ben Levi and Lucy Emery and their colleagues did this study. They basically said this: despite the widespread use of humour in social interactions and the considerable literature on humour in multiple fields of study, the use of humour in parenting has received very little formal study. So they've done a pilot study and had it published in a journal called PLOS One, and it's really, really interesting. As you compare your upbringing with mine, I think that the research rings true. They found that 55% of people who responded to their survey, there were 312 respondents, 55% said that they were raised by parents who used humour.
1 out of 2.
So the first thing that I think is, yeah, that's right. Half the population were not raised with funny parents, and that's where the world's gone wrong. I'm pretty sure that's the problem. They also found that 72% of respondents said that humour is an effective parenting tool. So there's actually 28% of people who think, no, humour does not belong in families. Let's not joke with the kids. 72% think that we should. But here's what I found really compelling. The quality of relationship with parents was positively associated with parental humour. In other words, as people filled in this survey, and they were all aged between 18 and 45, they rated the quality of the relationship that they shared with their parents as far higher when their parents were funny. And the assessment of parental effectiveness was also positively associated with parental humour. I know when I say sentences like that, it doesn't sound fun or funny or humorous. Science has a way of making anything fun. Like, you deconstruct humour in an academic way, it is not fun. Not even a little bit. They've truly made humour boring.
But what do they mean by humour? Because when I think about the different types of humour that we see in homes and families, often sarcasm is probably at the top of the list of what most people would consider humorous.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
I don't see that as being helpful at all.
I think this is a really important question, and maybe that also explains why the respondents gave the answers they did. In the article, they say one of the strongest associations between humour and parenting is the dad joke. We've talked about that a lot lately on the pod. Corny, pun-based, groan-inducing humour. But, they say, humour's expansive repertoire may have strategic applications for positive parenting techniques akin to how humour has been applied successfully to various real-world challenges. Tailored improvisation games that use humour and play-based exercises have shown promise for improving the mental health of individuals with early-stage dementia and their caregivers. And then they go on to talk about things like improv and improving resilience and adaptive forms of humor like affiliative and self-enhancing kinds of humor. That seems to be really, really positive. Did I just make it boring again?
I was just about to say you just used a lot of really big words.
Oh, I know. See, this is why academics shouldn't try to analyse funniness. We should just get one. I'm friends with a guy who won Australian Comedian of the Year about 20 years ago. We should just get him on to talk about why it's funny. Kylie, here's the short version. If people get humour wrong, and I'm thinking of roasts. Okay, so at the moment there's a really big trend on social media that you're supposed to feed your social media feed into the AI and it will roast you. And this comes off the back of the Comedy Channel doing roasts. There was a big one about a year ago with Tom Brady, the world's most, richest athlete ever. And I agree with you. It's brutal. Research does show that if we use humour in detrimental ways, it can have consequences including damaged self-esteem and self-worth, increased anxiety and depression, difficulty forming healthy relationships, impaired social and emotional development. I mean, getting humour right really does matter. And I just wonder, as I think about your question, whether there are too many parents who have kind of, just roasted their kids, burnt their kids, and that's not funny. That's just hurtful. It's got to be a reciprocal, consensual kind of humour to be funny. Otherwise, it's just bullying somebody.
So I guess the dad joke's a safe place to start.
Yeah. Have you got another one for me?
No, I don't.
Fantastic.
Let me find one.
No. I don't want you to find one.
Let me find one.
No, we're out of time. We need to move on to the next study. All right, let's go on to study number 2.
This study looks at how moving house impacts our children.
This is a really, really interesting study. Massive new study in JAMA Psychiatry using data from every single person born in Denmark between January 1 of 1982 and December 31 of 2003. Every single person. They ended up with a cohort of 1,096,916 people. So let's call it 1.1 million people. And the way it works in Denmark, there's a big registration system, the Danish civil registration system, and it's updated with residential addresses within 5 days of moving, which means that the researchers can track what's happening in terms of location and moves. They also looked at diagnoses of depression that were entered into various databases around the place. And essentially what they found, Kylie, were 2 major things. One of them is very hard to talk about. And frankly, I'm not sure that it's helpful to talk about it. So I'm only going to skim across the top of it. The second thing, though, we can really dive into. Finding number 1. The researchers found that people living in deprived areas during childhood, so we're talking about financial deprivation, low socioeconomic status areas, had an increased risk of depression across the lifespan. Didn't really matter how long they were there. If you lived in those areas, it wasn't really great. There was a reduced risk if those people were able to move into better neighbourhoods. This is one of the great income inequality challenges that we have in our society. The thing that I want to emphasize, though, because talking about that doesn't help anyone who's feeling stuck, there is some good news that comes with it, and it's this. Moving during childhood, regardless of what your neighbourhood is, whether it's a rich neighbourhood or a poor neighbourhood, moving during childhood was associated with significantly higher rates of depression in adulthood compared with not moving. In other words,
children who live in one family home, stable environments, stable communities do better.
Yeah. Yeah, that's pretty much it. Moving frequently was found to be really influential on mental health. If a child moved more than twice between the ages of 10 and 15, they had 1.6 times greater risk of developing depression than those who remain in the same place, even if that place was what the researchers are calling a deprived area. That is a low socioeconomic status area. This one really hurts me as a dad because of the decisions we've made across the years to relocate our family multiple times. We've had several interstate moves. And I know, you talk to so many people who feel either for work or for family commitments, they feel like they either want to or are compelled to move. And it really puts the guilt on. I know that. But I guess the reason that we wanted to share that is because this research just adds to an increasing amount of data that points out that avoiding moving during childhood is a protective measure against developing depression later in life. The practicalities of adhering to that obviously vary widely. Sometimes people have choice, often they don't. I think of the Bluey episode, The Sign, the first 30-minute episode of Bluey that came out at the start of the year. And Bandit decides, we're not taking the job, we're not moving, we're staying put because of all the anxiety that was caused in the family.
Why do we have to sell our house?
We've been through this, Bluey. Dad's got a new job in another city.
And what's wrong with this city?
I wish that Bandit had
Nothing.
moved the family because in real life that's what happens, and we could have seen Bandit's parenting skills on display through a really hard time. But I also am really glad that they didn't, because from a statistical point of view, it seems like the kids are going to be better off if you can stay put.
One of the things that we heard time and time again with each of our moves from well-meaning friends and family was kids are resilient. They'll be fine.
Yeah, and it's going to be a great experience for them.
But I look at the challenge that our children have had as they've had to assimilate into new communities, new school cohorts. It's been hard.
Yeah,
it's been
undoubtedly.
really, really hard.
Mm.
And their need to cling to old relationships as they have navigated new ones has been such an integral part of their capacity to thrive in your environments.
You think about it. Staying in one place during childhood means, number one, ideally, you've got family stability. And number two, you've got strong social connections to a particular neighborhood. You've got your schools or your sports clubs or your religious spaces. You've got that feeling of belonging, that feeling of connection. It just makes such a difference. Now, I just want to emphasize this in case the guilts are really piling up for people, including you and I. The research team were really, really clear that there are so many other determinants of mental ill health. It's really, really complex. And it's also critical to highlight that this is an association. It's not saying moving causes depression. It's saying that there's an association. There's a potential increased risk for a percentage of the population. The study only had access to participants with severe cases of depression, those who'd been diagnosed, and obviously they can't capture the complexity of different living situations, like kids that are living in multiple homes and all that kind of thing.
I was about to say there is so much more to take into account when you look at a child's life and the experiences that they have. This is just one of.
It is. So I guess for me, the take-home message of this study is we've got plenty of evidence globally now that if kids can be raised in more affluent neighborhoods, they do tend to have slightly better outcomes. But a bigger predictor of mental health challenges later in life is the number of moves kids have during their childhood. If kids can stay put, that seems to be ideal. However, if they are going to be moving, I'd say the other critical thing is to smooth out the transitions. Make sure that you do everything that you can to soften the impact of that uprooting experience so that you can potentially protect their mental health as they move forward.
Well, that was all a bit heavy.
We should have finished with the fun. We should have finished with the humour. Is that what you're saying?
Well, I've got a joke for you.
Oh, okay, good. Let's lighten the load.
What do you call the security guards from Samsung?
Security guards from Samsung, hashtag not sponsored. I don't know. I'm an iPhone user. I have no idea.
Guardians of the Galaxy.
Oh, because it's a Samsung Galaxy. let's stick with the science. Hey, thanks for trying. This is what happens when you're raised in a home with no humour. This is what happens.
I can't believe you're saying that.
The Happy Families podcast is produced by Justin Rowan from Bridge Media. If you would like more ways to make your family more fun and more happy, and more ways to understand more parenting science, jump onto our newsletter, happyfamilies.com.au. Subscribe today.
What's the difference between a piano, a tuner, and a pot of glue?
You know the podcast's over, don't you? What is
Yeah.
it? What is it?
You can tune a piano, but you can't piano a tuner.
I don't think that's funny. What about the pot of glue?
I knew you'd get stuck on that.
All right, you got me. You got me.